Well, there's nowhere else to start but the latest toxic discharges from Montrose in advance of the Media Committee today meeting at 1:30. Some of the responses that were sought have been published. It shows specific contradictions. The number of barter accounts wasn't one, it was three. The amount of money put through them wasn't 1.2 million, it was 1.6 million. We're joined by Sean Defoe, Bauer Media's political correspondent, Ciaran Murphy, former leader of the Social Democrats and TD for North Kildare and vice chair of the Public Accounts Committee, who are meeting in private enclave tomorrow, and Ciaran Mullooly, former Midlands correspondent with RTE. Sean, if I could start with you. The revelations to me detail around the private Renault late shows, the setup costs and all three of them and what was involved, the K Club, the disaster of the toy show musical with losses of perhaps up to 3 million, which seemed to have been covered up with a second and third barter account payment. But I thought the most damning thing of all was the publication of the letter from D. Forbes to Ryan Tubridy personally, private and confidential, the 21st of July 2020. And for me personally, this is etched in my mind because on the 24th of July 2020, I left Dublin, left Virgin, left Newstalk and full-time broadcasting. And I had 30 gigs in the diary and every one of them was cancelled. And each Friday night, we listened on the Late Late Show, cringy programmes, we're all in this together, solidarity. But this letter clearly replies and says, in writing, the DG personally guarantees for the next 5 years you will have no cut in your salary. When hundreds of thousands of people had to resort to €300 on the PUP payments, it's just a bit much, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it's a lot. It's a lot to process, and then like that language, RT shall not make any request or inquiry from you in relation to a reduction in the agreed fees up to 2025, when a lot of people were out of their jobs, a lot of people had pay cuts and all the rest, as you've mentioned. And look, it was, as it so happened last night, when all of this started to emerge and the documents filtered through, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, the media minister, the chair of the media committee and a number of members of that committee were all in the same place. They were all at a gig in Farmley last night for the women's football team ahead of their World Cup ventures, and the sort of jokes that was doing around among the committee members there was they never thought they would be looking at the FAI as a beacon of stability by comparison to what is going on with RT, and a lot of them filtered out then to look at more than 60 pages of documents that came in. You mentioned that guarantee to Ryan Tubridy, and we knew an agreement of sorts had been made with him that there wouldn't be further requests, but the stark terms and being signed off by the Director General. The contract for that tripartite agreement between Renault and RTE and Noel Kelly Management was released as well in full, showing that RTE had agreed to literally pay for a mock-up of the Late Late Show stage for these different Renault events, to get guests in, to pay for catering and for drinks and everything else. Interestingly, that agreement actually isn't signed by anyone at RTE. It's signed by the other two parties, but there's no signature on it. I'm sure questions will be asked about that today. But the question the committee members that I was speaking to last night come back to is the barter accounts, and is who knew what and when, because as the Chief Financial Officer Richard Collins told Ciaran Murphy, who will be speaking to in a minute, last week, he said there was only one barter account. We now know that there were three. And so that poses the question, did he mislead the committee willfully about the existence of these committees, or did he not know? And a lot of committee members wondering last night which of those two options was actually worse.
So what can we expect today? We have the former CFO, is it Breda O'Keefe, appearing, and Moya Doherty appearing. Did the currency have some story about those who didn't attend subcommittees of the board, the authority, and so on? What can we expect today?
Yeah, there'll definitely be questions to her about that. The story was basically that Moya Doherty didn't attend subcommittee on remuneration meetings for the bones of 4 years, if I have it right. So she'll definitely be asked about that. I think Breda O'Keefe is going to be a particularly key witness, given she was the chief financial officer who predated Richard Collins and who would have started these negotiations with RTE. There are obviously going to be questions about how this particular barter account was managed, and indeed the other ones, what they were related to, if they were connected to Toy Show the musical and the sort of financial disaster disaster that seems to have been for the organisation. So overall, the questions that will need to be asked and will certainly be answered is how many are there? Does it stop at 3 barter accounts? What kind of money was used in them? RT saying 1.6 million over the course of 10 years, pointing out in their letter to the committee that was roughly 1/1000th of RT's commercial revenues over that time, and trying to provide a defence for this spend that they gave to bring people to the Rugby World Cup by saying while that represented a €111,000 cost to the broadcaster, the advertisers who were represented or who were brought along spent 38 million cumulatively in the previous year with RTE. That seems to be their defence. But look, the drip is what's killing them and what is going to kill them, and more you would suspect may come out of this committee. And really seriously, for the first time, a lot of committee members have been on the fence over the last week about whether heads are going to roll. Last night I spoke to 3 or 4 who all said there will be resignations because of these latest revelations.
Yeah, well, there is actually a procedure here. We've had it with D Forbes. First of all, you can ask them to resign. The board could ask them to resign, and if they fail to resign, you can suspend them. Is there any of that in the air?
Well, but we don't know directly. What we know is that the board last night met. The board considered these latest findings, and obviously the documents were furnished to the committee. There's more meetings going on today. The Media Minister, Catherine Martin, is going to be briefed by Siún Ní Raghallaigh again before this committee starts. So I suspect if any of that is playing out this morning, we'll have the information just before 1:30. We don't know yet whether it's going to go that far, because all the board has said is that more information will be given at the committee, and all the executive board has said is that context will be added when that committee meeting starts. So you would imagine, I can't imagine any of them being asked to step aside or be suspended in advance of that meeting, because of course then you run into the problem that Alan Dillon was raising last week about D Forbes, in that they wouldn't have to appear at that committee this afternoon. So they'll be allowed to go through that process. We'll see what more comes out today, and I suspect if resignations are to be called for by the board, it will be after that meeting.
OK, well, you can expect live reports from Sean Defoe, Bauer Media's political correspondent, throughout the day as the news emerges. Catherine Murphy, welcome to the programme. You were actually the member of the Public Accounts Committee who asked Richard Collins about the number of barter accounts, and he clearly said 1, and he said 1.2 million. Both of those now transpired to be untrue. What's your feeling about that? Do you feel they're economical with the truth? They're barefaced lying, or what?
He was the one who brought the one barter account under the control of the finance department from the commercial department, and he had the detail of the transactions of that one barter account, and he gave some of those, the issues were, the kind of things they spent money on, like the Rugby World Cup, K Club and other things. I'm more inclined to believe that he didn't know, which is just as big an issue. And if he didn't know, who did know? I would have thought. I would have thought
Geraldine O'Leary had to know.
I would have thought so too, and because that's the commercial department, and I think that commercial department is where an awful lot of this centres. So, like everyone else, I feel misled. I feel whoever misled us, I feel quite angry, and and you're wondering if this ship can be steadied at all, or can they run the RTE, and you've got to separate that out from this is the executive board, the senior management from the broadcasting side, and I suspect that whatever anger I feel and the public feel, I suspect the people that work in RTE feel a multiple of that. But
and by the way, Catherine, have you got all the information? Like, there was quite a long list of it from the PAC last week. Have you got all the information you require?
No, we haven't yet. There was 31 items requested, and that's one of the things we'll be discussing tomorrow at our meeting, and you can expect that there will be another hearing of the Public Accounts Committee with RTE in the coming week or 10 days. And obviously we will hope to have that information be in full before that meeting happens, so that we can digest it,
Catherine,
and we can go into some considerable detail about some of this.
Okay, there are now 7 investigations into RT after the 3 announced investigations reviews, call them what you will. How you've been around, you've been involved with tribunals and so on, and various exposures over the year. What's the best way, in your experienced opinion, to streamline all of this?
Well, I think you've got to put it into three categories. There's the past, and we have to get to grips with the past. What happened? I mean, we know there are barter accounts, and we know there are multiples. What were they used for? We need to have that. We need to have that in detail. We need to get to grips with, and the letter the extraordinary letter that D. Forbes wrote to Ryan Tubridy at that particular time when,
it was so out of kilter with the national mood, and so out of kilter with the kind of oozing from every pore, the kind of sense of solidarity that RTE were emitting, that, this is awful and we've just got to hang together. And then this. Yeah, and then D. Forbes had come into PAC on a couple of occasions after that and categorically said that there were cuts for all of the 10 top, and essentially we know now there was a letter from her to Ryan Tubridy, really infuriating. But there's the past, so we've got to get to grips with that. But then the present is about RT will have to get a grip on itself in terms of the executive aspect of it. And Kevin Backhurst has said that he will reconstitute the executive board, and we don't know what that means. But there will have to be some quick action to give some sort of sense that the organisation is in control. And then there's the future, and that will be the examinations that the Minister has commenced. But they're not going to be quick. That will be months away before we see, a return on that. On the time that will be put into those investigations and the reports that will come from that. So there are distinct pieces that have to be looked at. But unless we get to grips with what happened in the past, those other two, the present and the future, are compromised. And, the broadcasting side will continue to be compromised by the executive board side or the senior management side. And one of the other issues that was revealed, Ivan, was the top 10. And I noted in that the top 100,
the top 100. The top 100,
yes.
59 were managers and 10 were executives. So, look, there's a substantial number of people there on good salaries.
Yeah, 84 employees and 16 contractors. The highest being 515 and the lowest, the 100th, was 116, 85. 851.
Yeah, exactly. But you would expect that there would be competence within people that are well-paid people. Some of the managers may well be on the broadcasting side, and they expect they are. But you would be expecting that there should be sufficient capacity within RTE with that kind of profile to actually deal with this. But I think
one other thing, which is the toy show. Yes, sorry, you finished that point.
Yeah, one thing that's really important is that RTE, our executives, are being honest with themselves and honest with each other. And I just have a big question mark over that.
You're saying you don't believe them?
Yeah, look, this is all silos, and certainly there was.
No, silos doesn't evade the issue. You either believe someone is telling the truth in front of your face, or you don't. Like a silo isn't like a lack of communication. The honesty is a central human characteristic.
It certainly is, and there were a couple of things last week, including from the commercial director, I didn't believe.
So, you don't believe them. OK, final thing I want to ask you is about the Toy Show musical. OK, anyone can do a concert, a gig, and it's a failure at the box office. I think that's forgivable. But I thought last week when Rory Coveney was asked about it, well, we don't know the exact figure. It may prejudice with other people, other ongoing negotiation we have. Their modus operandi, when they have a glugger, when they have a bad story, and whether it was the training in the Croke Park for 7 weeks or whether it was too lavish or not, but their reflex position, their default position seems to be get a barter account to paper over these cracks, tell nobody about it. Like, this only happened in the last 12 months.
It did, and in fact, one of the in the early months of this year, I had questions that went through Pack 2 RT about Toy Show, the musical, where we were trying to elicit some information about it, because it was quite heavily advertised at prime time, advertising slots in RTE, and one of the things we wanted to know was, was that counted in terms of the advertising foregone, in terms of the calculation for what it cost. And of course there were a number of shows that were, and this can happen with live shows, that were cancelled, and there was, people were quite infuriated that they were told late in the day and had booked hotel rooms and all of the rest of it. But we do need to interrogate that. We need to know, and we need to have an honest response, even if it's not a response that, if it puts, executives from RTE in an uncomfortable position, so what? We just need to have honesty on this.
All right. Well, we await the deliberations of your committee and the PAC tomorrow, who are obviously the heavy-duty artillery and compellability and forensic accounting. Catherine Murphy, TD for Kildare North and Social Democrats, thank you for joining us. Ciaran Mullooly has been listening to all of this. We spoke to him last week. What aspect of the latest 24-hour revelations do you think is the most interesting, Ciaran?
Well, good morning, Ivan. I'd have to say, firstly, I'm not surprised about the presence of 2 additional barter accounts. When, I listened carefully last week to some of the detail, and I happen to believe, I agree with Catherine. I think it's probably most likely that the CFO was not aware of the other 2 accounts. And I'll tell you why of that, because I listened for details of things like Olympic Games, events down through the last number of years, the World Cups. Remember, Ivan?
Italia 90. I remember Italia 90. Have we lost the line to Ciaran?
I'm with you. Oh, sorry,
good. It's okay. So you were making the point about World Cups and Olympics?
That's right. I mean, I was waiting last week for news of London 2012, Brazil 2014 for the World Cup, Brazil 2016 for the Olympic Games, Russia 2018. And I would say we're going to hear today that these barter accounts are historical. That they were set up at an earlier stage, perhaps through different divisions. But the key witness for me today is Breda O'Keefe. I think this is the witness I've been waiting to hear from. She's by clearly the most experienced member of the executive team who's going to be before these committees in the absence of Dee Forbes at the moment. She was there for 7 years, from September 2012 to March of 2020. She was across the Tubridy deal before she left the organisation, and she was the boss. I was in her office, Ivan, on a couple of occasions during that period. She was a tough cookie to deal with. She was
explaining your expense accounts in Roscommon, were you?
I wish, Ivan. I wish. And I mean, very, very briefly, I was before her with a project for a National Broadcasting Museum to be based at the site of the old Marconi transmitter down at Lone. We were coming in with a committee looking for a contribution from RTE. We were looking from land for RTE. We were turned down. We were flatly sent away. We were told the money wasn't there. They couldn't afford it. So you can imagine the bitterness and the disappointment that is there now among that committee, that project never went ahead. In fact, the land was sold at the time, Ivan, for less than €300,000. It wouldn't have topped up Ryan Tubridy's wages at a later date. So there's a lot of anger about that as well. But she was known to be a tough operator, a tough cookie, and she was second in command to Dee Forbes. So we're going to either hear today from her the rationale and the explanations for this reason, or we're going to hear that it was all Dee Forbes' idea and all Dee Forbes signing off. One or the other, we've got to hear today.
And if you go back far enough into RT, into Bob Collins's era, the CAG was in the building and there was none of this. When do you think it actually changed, like the commercial revenues? They've said the reason for the barter account was, over 10 years, they generated $1.65 billion in commercial revenues, and that they needed to glad hand these advertisers, sponsors, and so on.
Yeah, and I think the basis, the origin of this goes back to the Celtic Tiger. I mean, I know it's a long time back now, but the reality is the advertising spend went up. The budgets were significant. You couldn't get an ad on radio or television for a period of time. Those involved there, and a certain group of people inside an RTE, including, I might say, some of the managers included in that 69 managers, effectively of 69 managers in that top 100 list this morning. Their salaries went up at the same time. There were significant increases. This lineup in terms of additional and top-ups began And I think that's the origin of this situation. I think that's what the problem started.
Finally, the issue of suspensions, resignations, what's your sense of that? Because, I keep coming back. If I want to sack you and I'm your employer, I can sack you, but I've got to pay you 2 years' salary because you'll go to a tribunal and that's the way it works. And therefore, people are incentivized to cling on. And if you start firing people all over the place, they will take proceedings against you. What way do you think that will develop?
Listen, Ivan, you're long enough around the place more than myself to have spotted a key word in some of the documentation issued by RTE overnight that's going before the committee today. Litigation has been mentioned in a number of documents. You're going to hear this word this afternoon a number of times why RTE cannot provide information, cannot answer questions because of the possibility of litigation. There was a suggestion last week that it's already started, and that will apply with regard to the due process for the staff as well. Kevin Backhurst, the incoming Director General, has made it clear he's going to reconstitute a board. Now, explain that one for me, Ivan. I'm sure he's going to explain that in the coming days. But there will be many, many surprises if there are not significant changes in the executive board and indeed significant changes in the board of authority of RTE before this is over.
All right, Ciaran Mullooly, always a pleasure to talk to you. Former RTE correspondent, now community activist in the Midlands. Thank you for joining us.